Hello everybody. I'm very pleased to announce an upcoming project with someone I have a great deal of respect for and who actually inspired me to begin studying the great Sam Langford, the Boston Bonecrusher. I am of course talking about hardline boxing, known as the Boxing Librarian, and we are going to be counting down the top 5 toughest seasons of Sam Langford's career, which is a lot harder than might seem at a glance, because unlike many boxers, Sam Langford had complete insanity in his year-to-year record, but also fought a very long career and fought years past his physical prime, even into, a physical state where he couldn't possibly be licensed in today's boxing scene. But in this time, there are fighters who would fight with impaired eyesight or fight in a physical condition that's, that today would be considered medically dangerous. So we didn't have the same controls in this era. Langford fought from 1902 to 1926. And, many of these seasons are in contention for the top 5. At least 15 seasons are worthy of intense scrutiny if we're trying to put together a realistic top 5 list. We're going to be puzzling this out and, release a video for everybody celebrating these seasons, and also, with some honorable mentions, because 5 tough seasons doesn't really do justice to what this gentleman did in his career. But we're going to try and identify the top 5 and make a presentation, for everyone's enjoyment and for some, for their education as well. So many things set Langford apart from even other great boxers, although there's some overlaps in the greatness, but the degree to which Langford pushed the limits of adversity in his career really have him in a tier above, at least among successful boxers. Because, you can fight, quote unquote, everybody and not do well. But then amongst those who really go to the extremes in who they're facing, there are a handful who still manage to have a record that looks like those of boxers who had lesser competition. And so we're puzzling through, we're trying to identify the top 5, relative to adversity. So it may not just include the 5 years where he faced the toughest fighters, because it's also relative to his physical condition. For example, in his first full season of 1903, the last 2 fights of his 27 bouts that year, the last 2 fights Langford had was against the great Joe Gans and also the great Jack Blackburn. These were both legitimately great stylists and competitors, and Langford was still in his teens. And then if you go all the way to later in his career, say his 1920 season, which was a comeback season of sorts, Langford had nerve damage in one eye for 3 years at that point, or 2.5 years, but he still fought over 20 times, some of which was at an extremely high level. Some of these fights were stylistically, disadvantageous for someone with impaired eyesight, who was also short and old at that point in the fight game. And then in between, you have different degrees of Langford's physical condition relative to the opposition he faced and the schedule he fought. And so, this is going to be pretty tough for me. I've been studying Langford for a few years, but I'm by no means expert, just very much an enthusiast at this point. Now, Hardline Boxing has done a great deal of material on Sam Langford and has a lot of years in the game understanding the full texture of these times. I'm stumbling around a little bit relative to that, but between the two of us, I think we can produce something that people will enjoy listening to and, find some value in. And certainly for me personally, in my ongoing studies in Langford, this is going to be huge in developing my understanding of his career. And this really is a career where just simply studying it alone, relative to the scene, is a massive undertaking. This isn't this isn't a 40-fight career which is also a challenge to study anything. Dozens of fights in any high-level careers is a challenge, but this really goes beyond. We're talking about a super CV, over 300 fights, and dozens and dozens of fights at a Hall of Fame level, in addition to lots of contenders and tough people who didn't necessarily make the Hall of Fame, whether or not they were worthy, but they had legitimately powerful careers in their own right. So Langford's career is one of those that was so epic that even if you try and boil it down just to the extreme high levels of competition, it's still impossible to sum up. That's really what we're talking about. In fact, some of his years are difficult to sum up, just individual years. That's how far he pushed the boundaries. So this is the announcement, and look for that sometime in the next month or so. We're going to be releasing this, and I'm also probably going to release some carriage programming as far as talking about thought processes in measuring adversity, because that's a very broad term, and something we're going to have to agree on to produce this project is what exactly are we trying to measure. Is it tougher to be in prime physical condition fighting prime all-time greats at a fast pace, or is it facing down more adversity to be far past one's best and still fighting at a very, very high level, although perhaps not quite the same level as one did in their prime? I'm not sure about this. This is going to take some thought, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure to ponder over these things. And so, if you have any thoughts on this or your own opinions, please share in the comments. And, I look forward to helping present this material for everyone's enjoyment. And, certainly more to come on this. And in fact, my next video, I'm going to do just a brief outline of some of his more hectic years and why they might qualify to make that top 5. But trust me, this is not an easy selection process. This isn't like for most boxers, even great boxers. You can identify their key fights and which years they fell into, and then find an order. With this, even narrowing it down to 10 is rather difficult, because depending on the criteria, there are easily 10 years that could qualify as great years, even within this all-time great career. It's not an exaggeration to call this a super CV. In fact, it's not exaggerating to call this the super CV. There are only a handful of boxers in the whole history of pugilism who have something even approaching his overall levels of adversity across a career. For HARDLINE and also for myself, this is the greatest resume and greatest CV that's ever been compiled. So look for that coming up, and thanks for tuning in. Take care.